Eurocharm's White Book 2016 launched. Vietnam and TPP, non-member standpoint. Hello, you're with me, Linh Hương from Hanoi, and welcome to another episode of Beast Line, brought to you by VTV International. Let's start with several highlights in the economic scene from the past week. The European Union-Vietnam Free Trade Agreement will allow free movements of goods and capital between Vietnam and the EU, helping Vietnam avoid the middle-income trap. This was confirmed by the European businesses in 2016 edition of the White Book, which collects business opinions about how to strengthen Vietnam's competitiveness during the integration process. In this publication, the European Chamber of Commerce in Vietnam, or Eurocharm, said the EVFTA set an important landmark in the economic and trade ties between Vietnam and the EU. When taking effect, the trade deal can boost Vietnam's GDP to rise by 15% and export turnover to the EU by nearly 35%. Besides facilitating trade, the EVFTA is expected to improve standard indices and quality for Vietnamese goods and services. New waves of FDI from the EU will bring new skills, transfer knowledge and technology to help Vietnam pass the middle-income trap. The Vietnam-Korea Free Trade Agreement, or the VKFTA Support Center, was inaugurated in Hanoi on March 2nd. This aims at disseminating areas related to the Vietnam-Korea Free Trade Agreement. The center will consult and provide accurate and detailed information on the FTA for businesses and help them solve difficulties related to non-tariff barriers and granting of certificate of origin. The VKFTA came into effect on December 28, 2015, and covers many areas including certificate of origin, trade protection, apart from technical barriers to trade and service, intellectual property, and other legal issues. In 2015, South Korea continued to be one of the three biggest trade partners of Vietnam, with bilateral trade turnover of $34.3 billion, more than 29% higher than that of 2014. Vietnamese stock market, or the VN Index, is still listed among the best performing markets in the world market indices in February. After witnessing a sharp decrease in January, the VN Index recovered in February and ranked 10th among the best performing markets in the world. The VN Index rose 2.59% in February, standing at 559.37 points. Compared with other nations in ASEAN, Vietnam's stock market stood only behind the Indonesian stock market. In the first 2 months of 2016, the VN Index declined by 3.4%, but maintained better performances than the stock markets in Singapore and the Philippines. Remittances to Ho Chi Minh City, a locality receiving some of the highest volumes nationwide, reached more than $900 million in the first 2 months of this year. According to the State Bank of Vietnam's Ho Chi Minh City branch, most remittances flew into production and business. Experts forecast that remittances to Ho Chi Minh City this year will remain positive, reaching roughly $5.5 billion, the same as last year, thanks to the city's economic growth. To attract more remittances, besides government policies to encourage overseas Vietnamese to invest in their homeland, domestic commercial banks have also held promotional programs for money transfer services. According to Foreign Investment Agency under the Ministry of Planning and Investment, from January 1st to February 20th, 291 projects have been granted licenses with registered capital of $1,905 million. 137 projects from previous years have gained additional investments of over $898 million. Disbursed FDI for the first 2 months of this year has reached $1.5 billion, up 15.4% compared to the same period last year. Foreign investment has so far focused on processing industries, arts and entertainment. Singapore has been the largest investor, followed by Malaysia, Korea and Japan. And the capital city of Hanoi has ranked first in the top 10 provinces, attracting the most FDI in the first 2 months of 2016, according to the Ministry of Planning and Investment. This is the first time Hanoi has hit the record high of the most FDI capital inflows, with 40 investment projects accounting for more than 12.7% of the nation's FDI. Hanoi attracts FDI mainly in real estate, retail and technology. Currently, the city is in the process of revising investment projects in accordance with the nation's priority toward industry and services growth. We have just reviewed several economic and business highlights from the past week. Up next, let's learn more about the Trans-Pacific Partnership from the standpoint of non-TPP member countries in our crosstalk. When the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or TPP, takes effect, Vietnam is predicted to be the biggest beneficiary. Key export sectors of the country like textile, garment, leather and furniture will be more price competitive due to the import tax reduction in other TPP member countries. Neighboring countries to Vietnam with similar export products like Thailand and Indonesia will face more competition. So how do they view Vietnam as a member country in TPP, and what are their strategies to make the most out of Vietnam's membership in TPP? What about more developed economies like India and South Korea's view on Vietnam as a potential manufacturing hub? We will discuss these issues with Mr. Indranil Sengupta, Chief Executive Officer at Tata Group Vietnam. He is also the co-chair of Vietnam-India Business Forum. But before we start, let's take a look at the clip reviewing important milestones and contents of the TPP.
According to a research by ANZ, by 2030, the TPP will raise 12 member countries' GDP by 0.4 to 10%. For TPP members, only 15% of the GDP increase could be due to tariff cuts, whereas cuts in non-tariff measures in goods and services would account for 53% and 31% of the total increase in GDP, respectively. The largest gains in GDP are expected in smaller, open member economies such as Vietnam and Malaysia. Both countries will enjoy larger export markets and stronger positions in regional supply chains. For non-TPP member countries, South Korea, Thailand, Bangladesh, Laos, Cambodia, and Nepal, the estimated GDP losses would exceed 0.3% of GDP, since they would lose competitiveness in TPP members. Vietnam is a net exporter to 7 of other 11 TPP signatories. Up to now, direct investment into Vietnam from TPP countries has reached more than $800 billion, accounting for nearly 40% of total FDI into Vietnam. TPP's rule of origin requires the products produced by TPP members to have at least 60% rate of localization in order to enjoy the elimination of import tariff. Rule of origin is the critical factor to decide whether Vietnam can benefit from TPP or not. Unless Vietnam manages to source inputs domestically or from TPP members, Vietnamese exports will not be eligible to tariff reduction or exemption.
Mr. Sengupta, thank you very much for being here with us in our show today.
Thank you. Thank you, Yong, for inviting us.
Our first question is, how do you explain the difference between TPP and other traditional free trade agreements?
TPP is like the 4G of telecom. And before that, all the other FTAs were like 2G of telecom.
Not even 3G?
Because all the other FTAs, they more or less stop at the border of each country. That means they're only based on tariff. But TPP, not only tariff, it also has an impact on the non-tariff measures, or NTM as we call it. Any other FTA could have sort of agreed with the tariff, but could still play around with the non-tariff. It also encourages production and supply chain among the member countries. So expanding the production and the supply chain among the member countries. It also gets into the social and the environmental policies to a certain extent among the member countries. The labor welfare, the environmental standards, the intellectual property rights. I mean, that is more stricter than the WTO IPR regime. And with TPP, like I said, it's 4G, So subsequent FTAs has to maintain that standard which TPP has already set for others.
Vietnam is predicted to be the biggest beneficiary from TPP. So in your opinion, which other countries can be the big gainers from TPP?
See, there are two ways to look at it. One is if you look as a percentage growth of a GDP. I'm giving a very simplistic approach. And one is the expansion of the absolute income. When you said Vietnam is biggest gainer in TPP, Vietnam is supposed to grow the maximum in terms of percentage of GDP, the change, compared to any other countries. Mm-hmm. And the other gainer in the same sort of gains, which is like a percentage of GDP, is Malaysia. But in terms of absolute income growth, in terms of $1 billion, Japan is number one, or projected to be number one, and then it's US.
So from your point of view, how will each member country benefit from TPP?
Different countries will benefit in a different way. Some countries will benefit increase of exports. Some country will benefit an increase of manufacturing capacity. Some country will benefit in more market access. Some country will benefit in more investments coming in. Some of these 12 countries are different curves of their economic growth. So the benefits are very, very significantly different from each other. Among the member countries, and if you take a base year and 2030, and GDP growth percentage will be between 0.1 to 10%. Vietnam, I would presume it will grow more because it has more market access, the exports will increase, and hence the manufacturing will set up, the capacity will increase, and so would the FDI.
For industrial products rather than textiles, 85.6% of tariff lines will be eliminated once the TPP is effective. 10 years afterwards, the U.S. will remove nearly 100% of tariffs on industrial products. Regarding textiles, 73.1% tariff lines, equivalent to $3.5 billion, will be removed once the TPP takes effect.
Trong 11 nước TPP, thì Việt Nam là cái nước mà chiếm tới 99% cái hàng xuất khẩu về giày dép vào thị trường Hoa Kỳ. Và Việt Nam cũng đóng thuế về nhập khẩu giày dép cho Hoa Kỳ chiếm tới 99%. Việt Nam hiện nay là cái nước đứng thứ hai trong cái thị phần về mặt hàng dệt may và giày dép tại Hoa Kỳ, chỉ đứng sau có Trung Quốc.
Japan will immediately remove 86% tariff lines on Vietnamese exports. Seafood products that are ineligible for tariff cuts under the Vietnam-Japan FTA will be removed 11 years after the TPP comes into effect.
Tôm của chúng ta thì là những năm vừa rồi do vệ sinh an toàn thực phẩm và một số vấn đề khác thì có giảm. Thế nhưng mà chúng ta lại chiếm cái thị phần xuất khẩu tôm vào Nhật Bản lớn nhất thế giới. Trước đây là ta thua Indonesia, thì bây giờ ta đã vượt lên qua Indonesia.
While the U.S. is Vietnam's biggest export market, Japan is an important trade partner. Vietnam's export turnover to Japan accounts for 10% of its total export value.
TPP was signed in New Zealand quite recently. However, it only takes effect until the 12 member countries complete their ratification process in their own countries. This means that TPP would just be a paper if the United States or Japan fail to reach any completion of the ratification process in their countries. In your opinion, do you think that the United States will ratify this trade pact very soon?
In case of US and Japan, if you see the forecast, these are the two countries in terms of absolute GDP growth, in terms of US billion dollars. These are the two countries which gains the most. Right. And so I don't see any reason why it should not be signed. And to answer your question, I believe it will be signed in the US after the new government sets in. So you can expect the ratification in US sometime before the end of this year.
Mm-hmm. Benefits for TPP members due to tariff cuts are clear. What's notable is the increase of FDI from non-TPP members to Vietnam.
Việt Nam hiện nay đang gặm nhấm dần cái thị trường, cái thị phần của Trung Quốc về mặt hàng giày dép. Và khi vào TPP thì Việt Nam được đánh giá là ngôi sao đang lên tại thị trường Hoa Kỳ. Chúng tôi có thể thấy là một làn sóng đầu tư của các cái nhà sản xuất, kinh doanh về mặt hàng dệt và may mặc và giày dép của các nước. Có những cái công ty nước ngoài, có 5 nhà máy giày dép ở Trung Quốc thì hiện nay đã đều chuyển toàn bộ cả 5 nhà máy đó sang Việt Nam để tranh thủ các cái lợi ích do TPP mang lại.
Most of the big garment factories in Thailand moved to have the operation here already. Export garment from Thailand comparing to Vietnam, we have at least 17% cost comparing to Vietnam. By to be joint venture with the Vietnamese manufacturer and invest together, we have the knowledge. Once we combine together, I think that Vietnam manufacturer and Thai manufacturer, both of us win together for becoming the global production to export to other countries around the world.
Besides textiles, M&A activities in retail between Thailand big corporations and Vietnamese firms have been exciting.
Some people may argue that countries like Thailand are trying to take advantage of Vietnam's membership in TPP by increasing their investments into the country. And we can see that from the emergence of M&A activities between Thailand companies and Vietnamese companies. How do you think about this?
I view it in a different way. Where do investment flows in? You'll see investment flows in countries which has natural resources or rich in natural resources. Mm-hmm. Or which has great policies to attract investments or great tax breaks to attract investment. So Vietnam has TPP. That makes it Vietnam attractive. So there's nothing wrong if non-TPP countries are trying to invest in Vietnam or having M&A. Mm-hmm. It's like every country has their own unique selling points. Mm-hmm. So TPP and EU FTA are very unique to Vietnam in this region.
How do non-TPP developed economies view Vietnam? Does it make any difference to their strategy? Take India, for example.
India, by 2017, it will continue to be the highest GDP percentage growth country. And by the way, Vietnam is number 2, just after India. Now, I presume there will be certain trade diversions from India, and the estimated figure is around $4 to $5 billion over the next 10 years. India's domestic consumption is so much, so it really is not so export dependent. Some investment will shift to TPP countries and some trade diversion will happen for sure. Mm-hmm. Every country, whether developing or developed, who are non-TPP members will have different impacts. Example of Bangladesh or Sri Lanka. If you see the whole textile and apparel exports, Vietnam competes with Bangladesh and Sri Lanka. Now, because the export component of textile and apparels, the garments, is very high in their entire export basket of both Sri Lanka and Bangladesh. Now, if there's a diversion in that's a significant dent in their exports. So, every country will be impacted in a different way.
Right now, at the moment, foreign invested companies are seen as a driver of Vietnam's economic growth and export growth. And many of these FDI companies are actually not from TPP member countries. So how does being a TPP member contribute to the growth of FDI companies in Vietnam?
Now with the TPP, I personally believe that the manufacturing sector will get a boost. From India, I understand there's a lot of interest now to invest in Vietnam. Given this TPP scenario, I keep on receiving delegations who wants to take feedback on how to invest in Vietnam. Similarly, some other countries from this region who are already present here. For example, Korean companies are already present here. Mm-hmm. So who are already present here, they would probably enhance their scale of investment. I would definitely see a trend where more investments coming in the manufacturing sector and in the services. So it's something which we don't talk about in TPP, but it's also a very, very potential area.
Mm-hmm. So how do you think about Vietnam should leverage on the fact that it is a TPP member to benefit more from non-TPP member and to create a win-win situation?
If Vietnam can provide that platform, when there's investment coming in, there will be a lot of requirement for infrastructure. Because if you're trying to become a manufacturing hub, there'll be both ports and rails and roads has to be enhanced and augmented. So that's where I think as a country, we have to sort of support that development so that we can attract investors in the manufacturing sector. In 2017, it is projected that India will be, in terms of percentage growth, will be number 1 globally, and Vietnam will be number 2.
Many foreign companies are now choosing Vietnam over China, or Vietnam as a substitution of China, because they cite the reason to be that Vietnam has a lower labor cost. So how do you think how will this change the economic policies between Vietnam and China?
People will invest in Vietnam because of TPP, is not because of the lower labor cost. Mm-hmm. It will be because of the access to the duty-free, the 40% of the global GDP market, right? Now, the labor cost, with the TPP, the labor cost actually will go up in Vietnam.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Because of the rules which will be structurally implemented here. There will be a shift for sure. Some of the industries from China or neighboring non-TPP countries. What may happen is some of the goods from Vietnam, which we don't produce right now, but when we will produce in future, that may be exported to China. That may happen, but otherwise I don't see much of a change in the economic policy.
So what is your outlook on the manufacturing sector in Vietnam in a post-TPP environment?
This industry will get a great boost. And I have seen many discussions and reports which talks about textile. But beyond textile, there can be more other sort of sectors coming in. Let's say automobiles. Mm-hmm. Okay. Let's say more electronics, high-tech industries, and let's say watches. Now these will come mainly from non-TPP countries.
Right.
These investments in these manufacturing units. Well, Vietnam is number 3 right now in the EM export market, and Bangladesh is number 2. Vietnam actually can become number 2 after the TPP. It all depends on how this ROO, the rules of origin, will be played out. Let me give an example. Thailand is an auto hub, right, in this part of the world. Will that shift from Thailand to Vietnam? I don't think so. Because there are a lot of ancillaries, both upstream and downstream. For example, there are very high quality cold rolling mills in Thailand, and there are also ancillaries and downstream. So you cannot shift everything together, right? Hence, you cannot only shift the assembly plant or the SKD plant, because then that may not satisfy your RO rules of origin. So depends on which sector but RO will play definitely a key part in the decision of which sector can sort of bloom more and flourish more in Vietnam.
How about the services industry? What's your outlook on the services industry once TPP takes effect?
That's a very good question. Actually, most of the people don't talk about it. In fact, in this part of the world, and both in South Asia and Southeast Asia or East Asia, we have a lot of non-trade barriers for services. But with this TPP, 2 things will happen. One, because of increase of manufacturing capacity in Vietnam, the domestic demand of services will increase. Mm-hmm. And point number 2 is if we can export services. One of the areas which I think is ITES, that is IT-enabled services. I think Vietnam is very strong. Vietnam can definitely pose a very, very competitive challenge to India or Philippines.
Small and medium enterprises are considered the most vulnerable group in TPP integration. A good example are SMEs in the steel industry.
Các doanh nghiệp vừa và nhỏ trong ngành thép thì chắc là không thể tồn tại để mà có thể phát triển được. Đối với nhất là trong cái điều kiện thế giới hiện nay, tức là cái trình độ công nghệ rất là cao, cho nên là những cái doanh nghiệp vừa và nhỏ của ngành thép thì nói chung là cần phải có những cái sự liên kết nhau lại để tạo lên những cái doanh nghiệp có quy mô lớn hơn, để mà có cái năng lực về công nghệ cũng như là về tài chính để mà có thể trụ vững được và phát triển được trong cái thời gian tới.
Doanh nghiệp thì cần biết cái cụ thể hơn, ví dụ như là các cái sự so sánh giữa thị trường Việt Nam với từng thị trường trong 12 đối tác của hiệp định TPP, và cần với các nhà nước, với các cơ quan nghiên cứu nhà nước hỗ trợ kỹ hơn về các cái phân tích về chiến lược của Việt Nam với các từng đối tác đó.
To help Vietnamese firms adapt to TPP, 3 activities have been put in place. First thing is to increase business awareness of the TPP. 6,000-page TPP documents are not easy for every company to understand. Therefore, Vietnam Chamber of Commerce and Industry collaborated with relevant agencies to organize seminars on TPP and publish shortened version books of the TPP. Streamlining administrative procedures, particularly origin self-certificate, has been another support measure for businesses. To qualify for this self-certificate model, businesses need to pass a certain threshold of export turnover to prove its sustainable exporting activities.
Đối với tự chứng nhận xuất xứ được quy định ở trong những hiệp định như là TPP và hiệp định thương mại tự do giữa Việt Nam và EU. Tuy nhiên thì hiện nay hai cái hiệp định này vẫn chưa có hiệu lực. Thế thì về phía Bộ Công Thương thì chúng tôi cũng đã có cái sự chuẩn bị và thông qua một cái bước đệm hay là một cái bước chuẩn bị quá độ, tức là triển khai cái tự chứng nhận xuất xứ trong ASEAN. Thế thì trong ASEAN thì hiện nay cũng đang có một cái dự án thí điểm để chúng ta làm cái việc này. Ở Việt Nam chúng ta cũng đang rất là tích cực tham gia.
More efforts need to be made in market information, particularly about what products should Vietnamese exporters focus on and what are the new requirements of the importing markets. This is the new task of trade counselors in 2016.
Các cái tham tán thương mại cũng như là các cái tùy viên thương mại tại địa bàn Hoa Kỳ thì còn một cái trách nhiệm nặng nề nữa, tức là phải tham gia vào trong các cái vụ kiện chống bán phá giá, chống trợ cấp đối với hàng hóa của Việt Nam, tham gia vận động đấu tranh đối với các cái đơn vị liên quan của phía bạn để mà giải tỏa các cái ách tắc cho cái hàng hóa xuất khẩu của Việt Nam.
Vietnam is in its critical point to shift its development model to escape the middle income trap. TPP, with its trans-border commitments, is considered a push for Vietnam's economic reforms.
Once again, thank you very much for spending your time with us in our show today.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
As a participant in multi-free trade agreement playgrounds, it is necessary for Vietnam to have a clear understanding of its position in those playgrounds that have overlapping areas. To prepare for its integration strategy, Vietnam needs to understand how other countries, including non-TPP members, position Vietnam in their trade policies. We hope that our episode of Beastline this week with Mr. Indronin Sengutta has brought about a new angle of TPP with Vietnam as one of the 12 members. And that's all we have for this edition of Beastline. Thank you very much for being with us. Feel free to log on to vtv4.vn or youtube.com/vtv4go to rewatch our programs. And goodbye for now.